to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Sunday, January 19th, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:14 a.m. It set at 4:48 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, fair and continued cold on Sunday. Monday, partly cloudy to cloudy and warmer, gentle west and northwest winds. The low temperature, 6 degrees. The high temperature, 26. Today's headline, Don't Enter War, Kennedy. New York, January 18th. Joseph P. Kennedy, retiring ambassador to Great Britain, declared tonight that the United States can't stay out of the European war and must stay out for its own good. In a long-awaited speech broadcast over a nationwide radio hookup, Kennedy also asserted that, number one, the Lend-Lease bill now before Congress, which would give President Roosevelt dictatorial powers in disposing of defense equipment and in other matters, should not be passed. Number two, utmost aid should be given to Great Britain, but this aid should not and must not go to the point where war becomes inevitable. Number three, it is not incompatible for America to avoid war and still help Great Britain, and the final test on the issue of war or neutrality should be what is best for the United States. Kennedy, who tendered his resignation on November 6th, had just been released from the diplomatic rule that a former ambassador should not express his views until his successor is appointed. His successor has not yet been appointed, and it was only several days ago that the White House released him from a diplomatic curb on speaking his mind. Kennedy, a close friend of Roosevelt since the latter was Assistant Secretary of the Navy during the World War, was a heavy contributor to Roosevelt's campaign in 1932. He was appointed to head the Securities Exchange Commission when it was organized in 1934. He resigned a year later, and when the Maritime Commission was formed, he was recalled to become its chairman. On December 10, 1937, he was appointed ambassador to Britain. He left England for the United States last October 23rd. To go to war is not in our best interests, Mr. Kennedy asserted in his address tonight. Unless we are attacked, the American people do not have to go to war. War, he said, would destroy democracy at home, and the United States does not want a dictatorship of either the right or left. This is not our war, he declared. We were not consulted when it began. We had no veto power over its continuance. We should arm to the teeth and give as much help as we can, but do it on a basis of preserving American ideals and interests. After detailing America's unpreparedness, the former ambassador discussed the difficulties of transporting an expeditionary force across 3,000 miles of sea in either direction. He said he was confident the United States, by using its great energies, could be made secure against any group of powers in the world. Washington, D.C., January 18th. Washington's reaction to the radio address of Joseph P. Kennedy, whose resignation as ambassador to Great Britain will not be effective until his successor is named, followed the well-defined cleavage between war and anti-war groups. Interventionists were shaken by Kennedy's statements that England is not fighting our battle, and this is not our war, but remain unchanged in support of President Roosevelt's bill to set up a war dictatorship in the United States. Non-interventionists, for the most part, agreed with his insistence that the United States should keep out of the war because war can only spell bankruptcy and the loss of democracy in the United States. Some members of both groups shied from his suggestion that the United States make outright gifts of arms, munitions, and airplanes to Britain instead of the president's loan lease program. In all sections of the Capitol, it was felt that Kennedy's speech will play a prominent part in debate on the dictatorship bill. The real weight of the speech must be judged, it was said, from what mail it will bring to Congress. If the flood of mail is heavy enough in support of Kennedy's position, the address will influence many an undecided member of Congress and may change the position of some in the non-interventionist ranks. Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, outstanding non-interventionist with whom Kennedy conferred here Thursday night, said, "I agree with most of Kennedy's speech. I would much prefer to have Congress vote to make an outright gift of a certain amount of aid to Great Britain rather than give the president power to give whatever he desires to any nation he wishes." Senator Alexander Wiley, Republican, Wisconsin, "I thought it was a remarkable speech. I think the matter of his presentation cannot help but work a constructive influence. His calm tone, his complete lack of personalities, and his considered analysis his considered analysis will carry great weight with the American people." Senator Robert A. Taft, Republican, Ohio, "I more or less agree with Mr. Kennedy. However, there is nothing to indicate the time has come for us to make outright gifts to Great Britain." Senator Carter Glass, Democrat, Virginia, "I wouldn't mind voting for outright gifts, but I am going to vote for the bill and it is going to pass. If Congress could surrender any more authority to the president than it has already, it is difficult to conceive how it could do it." Senator Edwin C. Johnson, Democrat, Colorado, "I'm in accord with much of what he said." Senator Bennett C. Clark, Democrat, Missouri, "Of course I am opposed to outright gifts to England, but I am reserving comment on the rest of the speech until I have studied it more thoroughly." Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican, New York, "I think he has hit the nail on the head and I agree with him 100%. Senator Warren R. Austin, Republican, Vermont, "One of his theories seems to be inconsistent with the other. His theory is apparently based on the premise that there is not an immediate need for America to speed up and produce for England." Representative James A. Shanley, Democrat, Connecticut, "Anybody who is sincerely for aid to Great Britain must delegate the authority carried in the pending bill. We can't circumscribe that authority and get the job done. Brutally, if we want to give Britain aid, the way to do it most effectively is by this bill." Representative Saul Bloom, Democrat, New York, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, "After listening to Mr. Kennedy tonight, I would still very much prefer to take the advice of Mr. Hull, Mr. Morgenthau, Mr. Stimson, Mr. Knox, and Mr. Knudsen, and certainly not forgetting Mr. Roosevelt." Senator James F. Burns, Democrat, South Carolina, "I thought Mr. Kennedy's speech was a very strong statement of the reasons why this country should render all aid to Britain promptly short of war." Senator Alban W. Barkley, a Democrat, Kentucky, Senate Majority Leader, "I wish to study the speech before commenting." Washington, D.C., January 18th. President Roosevelt today gave his personal sanction to the impending war survey of England to be made by Wendell Willkie, unsuccessful Republican candidate, last November. The White House announced that Mr. Roosevelt is willing to see Willkie, if the latter so desires, when he comes here tomorrow to confer with Secretary of State Cordell Hull. The Secretary has received instructions from Mr. Roosevelt to give Willkie all available information on conditions abroad and a complete outline of the administration's foreign policies. The presidential blessing was pronounced on Willkie as it was reported in Washington that he is undertaking the inspection tour of England on a confidential assignment from J.P. Morgan, the international banker who managed Britain's American finances in the last war. Willkie's assignment from the banker, whose customary sources of information have been dried up by the war, according to reports, is similar to that which Harry Hopkins, former Secretary of Commerce and White House intimate, is undertaking for the president. This report explains why Willkie encountered no opposition despite his bitter campaign against the president a few months ago from the State Department or White House when he announced his intention of making the survey. In fact, the White House made the survey possible by ordering the State Department to grant Wilkie permission to make the trip, according to reliable sources. An ordinary citizen such as Wilkie pretends to be would be denied a passport. Wilkie's enlistment in the ranks of warmongers and ready adoption into the Roosevelt family is seen by non-interventionists as the product of elaborate planning. The immediate object of this plan is to secure passage of the New Deal War Dictatorship Bill. The War Dictatorship Bill has brought into the administration's war party another frequent critic of the president, Senator Carter Glass, Democrat Virginia, whose opposition to the third term led him to nominate James A. Farley for the Democratic presidential nomination at Chicago, came out for an immediate declaration of war against Germany. The 83-year-old senator's support of the president's war aims brought him a place on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, which is to handle the War Dictatorship Bill. He was picked by the administration for the post because non-interventionists have a sizable representation on the body. The front for this movement to enact the bill is the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies, which formed a meeting ground for Wall Street and the New Deal. In this committee, New Dealers have forgotten their feud with economic royalists by making a common cause with Mr. Roosevelt once was wont to vilify. Morgan and his associates are sponsors of the committee, whose chairmanship was offered to Wilkie. It is possible that he may take the post on his return and in it direct propaganda for the dictatorship bill. In a survey of England, Wilkie will see just what British officials want him to see. It can be expected that the carefully conducted tour of that embattled country will bring him back as ardent for every aid to the British cause as he was against the third term last fall. At the same time, according to reports, he will seek to sound future trends for Morgan. The banker is said to be gravely concerned over what form of government Britain will have even if she wins the war. He is disturbed by reports that a form of labor socialist state may be set up by Ernest Bevin, the Labour Party leader Prime Minister Winston Churchill has brought into the cabinet and working to build a unified front against Hitler. The same fears in President Roosevelt's breast have been offered as an explanation for Hopkins' visit to England. Many informed persons in the capital believe Mr. Roosevelt sent Hopkins to England because as a social worker and dyed-in-the-wool New Dealer, he talks near the same language as Bevin and might be taken into confidence by that Britisher. Morgan and his associates, as well as administration officials, also are interested in the influence and size of the Peace Party in Britain. It is said that a considerable group of wealthy Britishers favor peace, which would give the continent and colonies of conquered nations to Hitler on condition he leave Britain alone. It is reported that Wilkie, as the emissary of Morgan, might obtain confidential information from members of the peace group if it exists. Hopkins also has been charged with gathering what information he can on the subject, it is said. And now for world news. Athens, January 18th. Despite harrowing rain and snowstorms, Greek troops today were reported increasing their offensive pressure against the Italians in all sectors of the Albanian battlefront. At sea, too, the Greeks claimed a new success, reporting another big Italian supply ship had been sunk by a Greek submarine. The torpedoed ship, the third such attack reported in 2 days, was the 11,452-ton Sardegna, the Greeks said. The Ministry of Marine declared the Sardegna was sent to the bottom December 29th, despite a heavy escort of warships around the convoy. Submarine Proteus, which delivered the attack, thus far has not returned to its base, the communique said. The two other ships announced yesterday as having also been torpedoed were the Liguria and Lombardia. On land, the Greeks said the ever-increasing pressure on their troops had brought these results. In the north, Italians driven from several positions by heavy artillery fire. In the central sector, Italians forced back with the Greeks bettering their position, especially in the region north of Klissura. In the coastal area, Greek attacks cleared Italians from several of their advanced positions. The Italians, it was said, have had great difficulty in supplying their advanced post along the coast south of Valona, partly because of mountains which come right down to the water's edge, and partly because they are flanked by Greek mountain forces on their left. Italian prisoners continue to stream toward the rear. In addition to the 1,000 wolves of Tuscany captured northwest of Klissura yesterday, the Greeks reported they have a large section of the Pisteria Alpine Division almost surrounded in that same area. Violent Italian counterattacks there failed with heavy fascist losses, the Greeks said. Dispatches from the Yugoslav frontier said the Greeks likewise had lost heavily. Wherever possible, the Greeks constantly harassed the Italians so as to prevent them from digging in and holding their ground. Only the Blackshirt political militia is given credit by the Greeks for putting up a good fight. The Italian prisoners who stream back to the front are a sorry-looking lot, though they show no signs of lack of food or equipment. They move along in all sorts of uniforms, from the young Alpine officers who are almost jaunty in their green hats and swinging capes to others who look like walking ragmen. Some manage to be captured complete even with knapsacks. Many still wear their tin hats. Some hobble painfully on the stones of the road after the first few miles. Many wear old rags tied over their heads, and many are bandaged. They are a miserable-looking lot, particularly when it is raining, and usually it is raining in this part of the world. But they manage to get cigarettes along the way from Greek soldiers, and in general they seem glad enough to be out of the front line. Greek newspapers today made much of a reported statement of prisoners from the Wolves of Tuscany division that the Italians did not want to fight and that there were many deserters even before the troops sailed from Brindisi for Albania. On the Yugoslav-Albanian border, January 18th, Greek sources reported today that Italians are bringing up strong reinforcements on all sectors of the Albanian front, including large numbers of Italian planes relieved from Mediterranean services of the Germans. A concentrated Italian air attack apparently is imminent, the sources said. Cairo, Egypt, January 18th. British bombers raided the besieged Italian base of Tobruk, Libya, Thursday night, starting two big fires in military buildings and causing 10 explosions, the Royal Air Force Middle East Command said today. Smaller fires and one large explosion also were caused near the main quay. A communique said, Darna likewise was raided and a number of bombs dropped on the barracks there. On the ground, a communique said there was no change in the situation. The British were still drawing up artillery and preparing the way for an assault on the base. The aerodrome at Martiza Rhodes also was attacked Thursday night, and fires and explosions resulted, the communique said. In Italian East Africa, the Caproni workshops in the Mai-Adaga area were again raided, the RAF reported. Italian airplanes visited the Nile Valley last night for the first time since the British offensive began in the Western Desert. Cairo had two alerts, and the planes bombed a canal, but there were no casualties. Alexandria also was raided without result, a communique said. Rome, January 18th. The Italian High Command said today a strong enemy attack supported by planes and tanks had been completely repulsed by Italian troops on the Kenya front in East Africa. Many losses were inflicted, the Daily Bulletin said. On the Sudan front, the communique said the British made an attack on a fascist position with armed motor vehicles which were put to fight. Increased artillery patrol activity around the British encircled Italian garrison at Tobruk on the Libyan coast also was reported. On the Djeraba Oasis front, some 150 miles southeast of Tobruk, the communique said, our planes bombed and machine-gunned enemy troops and motorized equipment. A British Hurricane fighter plane was reported shot down by naval anti-aircraft fire during a raid on Tobruk. Berlin, January 18th. Large squadrons of German Stukas dive-bombed the aerodrome on the British Mediterranean island of Malta this afternoon, informed German sources declared tonight. The bombers, accompanied by their own and Italian fighter escorts, were said to have scored heavily with hits on hangars, barracks, and runways. The attack lasted 7 hours, German sources said. They added the British put up a wild defense which failed to hinder the German pilots from plowing up the airfield and setting fires which sent up smoke far beyond the reaches of the island. Dispatches from Malta said the German attack lasted 3 hours and that 5 and possibly 6 of the raiders were shot down. Valletta, Malta, January 18th. There is not the slightest sign anywhere on this British island stronghold that the heavy attacks of German dive bombers are going to succeed in what the Italians failed to do, make Malta give up. The morale of the people of this ancient island appears unshaken, their confidence in British victory high. The whole island is a natural air raid shelter. As soon as sirens sound, the Maltese calmly go to their deep stone-hewn underground shelters. Going ashore here from a British warship for the first time since last December 20th, I found the islanders better prepared than ever for attacking bombers, and Malta showing singularity little damage. Maltese gunners, who early established an enviable record for anti-aircraft accuracy daily, are adding more planes to their score. And it is almost a common sight now to see a British fighter pilot's victory roll. During 72 hours ashore in Malta, I watched one flight over a British aerodrome in which I saw the British quickly send 2 of a squadron of 8 Germans hurtling in flames to earth. Berlin, January 18th. Surprise dive bombings of 2 airports in southeast England today caught British defenders off guard and destroyed RAF planes poised for a takeoff from both fields, informed German sources reported tonight. They said the dive bombers were part of an air fleet which attacked a convoy off the mouth of the Thames and repeatedly bombed London in a daylight follow-up of a heavy Friday night raid on the South Wales port of Swansea. The German bombers were said to have inflicted the heaviest damage on the English airfields before the defenders could raise a strong anti-aircraft fire. A 4,000-ton merchantman hit squarely on a hatch by one bomb was described as probably a total loss in the low-level raid on the convoy. Only small units were said to have carried out the attacks on London. Besides leaving a whole area of Swansea afire, setting fire to a merchantman in the harbor and 4 waterfront districts, German informants said Nazi raiders Friday night hit the ports of Southampton, Bristol, Plymouth, and Portland, and smashed also at British anti-aircraft gun and searchlight emplacements. London, January 18th. A string of German bombers crossing the channel one by one pounded the east coast this afternoon, and one got through London's anti-aircraft barrage to unload 5 bombs on a residential area. It was London's first daylight air alarm in 12 days, and the Air Ministry acknowledged a small number of dead and injured. Although the London bombing was attributed to only one plane, heavy gunfire could be heard. The alarm indicated that others were trying to get through on the southeast approach to the capital, the air highway from the Dover Strait. Generally, however, bad weather forced a lull in the give-and-take air battle of Britain. Royal Air Force forays were restricted by the weather to raids on nearby German-occupied waters and coasts over Friday night. Direct hits were made on 4 ships off the Dutch coast, the Air Ministry said, one ship sinking and another listing. British night raiders also were reported to have attacked the German invasion ports of Brest and Cherbourg and 2 aerodromes in German-occupied France. The Admiralty announced that the trawlers Chestnut and Desiree have been sunk. There were no casualties, the communique said. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, January 18th. The British today captured and put a prize crew on board the 8,199-ton French freighter Mendoza, which for the last week had been trying to slip through the British South Atlantic blockade with a cargo of food for France. The Brazilian Navy Ministry said Brazilian planes patrolling the coast reported the British cruiser Asturias, which had been doggedly following the Mendoza for days, intercepted her 5 miles off Ponta into Petrocrohi, state of Santa Catarina, and that the two ships later stood out to sea. The Mendoza already had been turned back 3 times before she sailed from Punta del Este, Uruguay on January 15th and steamed along the coast, hugging the shore, while the Asturias followed outside territorial waters. The freighter put in at Portobello, Brazil last night and early today, headed northward again through dangerous shoal waters, making regular soundings as she proceeded. The Asturias followed and apparently intercepted the Mendoza just outside the territorial limits. The newspaper O Globo published a report from Santos quoting radio messages heard in that port, which said the Mendoza was detained precisely where the ship was forced to get away from the coastline on account of the shoals. A launch from the Asturias came alongside, the paper said, and sent a prize crew on board. The ship presumably will be escorted to a British port. Saigon, French Indochina, January 18th. The French Indochina government announced today it had stemmed the Thai advance in western Cambodia by throwing back a complete battalion of 750 troops advancing along the road to Sisaphon. On the fronts to the north, the Thai invaders shelled Savanakhet and bombed Paksi from the air. Earlier, 1,000 Thai troops were reported repulsed at Paksi. Bangkok, Thailand, January 17th, delayed. The Thai High Command said today hostilities in the undeclared war between Thailand and French Indochina were growing in scope by land, sea, and air, and that Thai forces had defeated 3 French white battalions Thursday, killing at least 600 of the opposing force. Thai troops were advancing in the east and northeast sectors, the communique said, adding that a French plane had tried to raid Bangkok but had been driven off. Washington, D.C., January 18th. A search of naval archives today disclosed that the American Navy was virtually loaned to Great Britain during the World War. Franklin D. Roosevelt, at that time, was Assistant Secretary of the Navy and practically ran the department. His friends contended that his policies were followed in the department during that period. The Navy has never been particularly pleased with this chapter in its history, which is of interest today in light of suggestions of interventionists that the American warships be loaned to Great Britain. The suggestions are heard more frequently since President Roosevelt submitted his proposal for war dictator powers to Congress. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson told the House Foreign Affairs Committee Thursday he could foresee conditions under which it might be desirable to transfer American warships to the British flag. Lesser administration officials make no secret of their belief this is the next step in the administration's Aid to Britain program. The Navy Department has no desire to have its war record cited by the interventionists as precedent for a transfer, as they are now seeking to do. The Navy, enlisting its war accomplishments, has soft-pedaled the fact that, for the most part, its achievements in the war zone were accomplished under British command. The American warships were British in operation and control and American only in their flags and crews. Records disclose that this was the plan of operation adopted by the High Command in the American Navy before the United States entered the war. The first American vessels to go into the war zone were 6 destroyers, which were stationed at York River, Virginia, the day war was declared on April 16, 1917. On April 14th, the squadron was ordered to Boston, and on April 24th, it was commanded to go 50 miles east of Cape Cod and open sealed orders. These orders, over the signature of Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels, were in part, number 1, the British have requested cooperation of a division of American destroyers in the protection of commerce near the coasts of Britain and France. Your mission is to assist naval operations of Entente powers in every way possible. Proceed to Queenstown, Ireland, report to the senior British naval officer present, and thereafter cooperate fully with the British Navy. These orders were opened by Commander Joseph K. Taussig, senior officer of the squadron, who is now a rear admiral. Two commanders of destroyers in his squadron, Alfred W. Johnson and Arthur P. Fairfield, are now also rear admirals. The squadron reached Queenstown May 4, 1917, and Taussig reported according to instructions to Sir Lewis Bailey, British Admiral at Queenstown. 10 days later, a second squadron of 6 destroyers reported to the Admiral, and by July 5, 1917, 34 American destroyers were under the British officer. Bailey continued to command about this number of American destroyers until the end of the war. London, January 18th. Sir Arthur Salter, Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Shipping, said tonight it would require a United States shipbuilding program as big as that of the World War to relieve Britain of the threat of starvation because of the losses due to German submarines. Britain, he said, has sought all available inactive ships and is increasing her own building program, but will nevertheless need about 5 million or 6 million tons a year to feel safe. She would like to see a building program in the United States as big as that of the last war, when the rate reached 4 million gross tons a year, he told a press conference. That would give us enough margin to cover losses. British losses since the Germans seized French air and submarine bases in June have been about 90,000 tons a week, or more than 4,500,000 tons a year. Most of these losses, however, have been offset by building new ships and the purchase and transfer of Danish, French, and other ships to the British flag. Britain is negotiating now with Danish interests in the United States in an attempt to get control of 38 Danish ships totaling 150,000 tons in American ports. Danish shipping already in British hands totals 344,000 tons. Salter said Britain already had withdrawn most of her shipping from the Pacific and other non-essential routes, leaving the trade to the United States and other nations. He expressed doubt that the United States rate of shipbuilding as a non-belligerent could equal its wartime rate, but added he was confident it could be speeded up. I cannot believe that the munitions and airplanes America is making will stay on the other side of the Atlantic when they are needed here, Salter declared. London, January 18th. Colonel Arthur Evans, a member of Parliament for Cardiff, South Wales, cabled an invitation to Wendell Wilkie today to address members of the British group of the Interparliamentary Union at the House of Commons on the Aid for Britain bill now being considered in the United States Congress. Wilkie will leave the United States on Wednesday for a short visit in Great Britain. Vichy, France, January 18th. French and German heavy industries are working out a plan for full cooperation, it was disclosed tonight by the Ministry of Labor and Industrial Production. The ministry said that representatives of the French and German metallurgical industries have been meeting in Paris for several days, and that questions of distribution of orders and supplies of raw materials have been thrashed out. To facilitate the discussions, it was announced commissions were organized for the machine construction, mechanical goods, precision instrument, electrical construction, and automobile and bicycle industries. It was stated that this first concrete effort at collaboration has revealed advantages which France might derive from the policy laid down by Marshal Henri Pétain in an agreement with Adolf Hitler at Montreuil. Discussing the agreements already reached by the industrialists, one official of the ministry said that the first stones were being laid for a united European economy, which the Germans and French are seeking to construct. Foreign Minister Pierre-Etienne Flandin is an outspoken exponent of Franco-German economic collaboration. Diplomatic circles took considerable interest in the deal. They viewed it from the standpoint of American Ambassador William D. Leahy's supposed mission in Vichy and world interest in American moves to give further aid to Britain, as well as Russian efforts to supply Germany. New York, January 18th. Otto Abetz, German ambassador to Paris, and Ferdinand de Brennan, the Vichy government's representative there, are expected to arrive soon at Vichy to present a series of new demands from Berlin, the British Broadcasting Corporation declared today. Berlin, January 18th. DNB, official German news agency, announced today that a Belgian trade delegation had returned to Brussels from Berlin after concluding negotiations for food and raw materials for Belgian industries. DNB said the German government gave the Belgians assurances it would deliver the necessary additional quantities of grain for bread and raw materials, provided Belgian authorities as well as Belgian producers and consumers fulfilled their obligation toward the common weal. Belgium must dovetail her economy to the necessities of the present situation, the agency said. Bern, Switzerland, January 18th. Amid portents of stepped-up German aid for Italy, diplomatic quarters here heard reports today that Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, with their chief military, diplomatic, and economic advisors, would hold a full-dress conference tomorrow. Whether it foreshadows a German move in the Balkans, a thrust at Gibraltar, or simply additional German air aid from Italian and perhaps Romanian bases was a matter of speculation. Neither Rome nor Berlin confirmed officially that such a meeting had been arranged, but diplomatic sources said they expected no confirmation until it's over, possibly Monday. The Brenner Pass Alpine setting for several Axis conclaves is regarded as the likely scene. Mussolini, however, may go to Germany this time. It was suggested to repay Hitler's visit to him in Florence last October 28th, the day Italy's invasion of Greece began. Some diplomatic advices said the dictators might meet in Munich or Salzburg. Among the conferees, it was said will be Dr. Karl Claudius, German trade expert, who is due in Rome on Monday for 2 weeks of what an official Italian announcement called important talks on trade questions under the year-old Axis commercial agreement and transportation problems. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 18th. Intensive German Air Force preparations at more than a dozen large landing fields in southern Romania led predictions today that the Nazis may be arranging hopping off places for new action in the Mediterranean area. Although fewer than 100 Nazi planes were believed to be stationed in Romania now, thousands of ground crew men are quartered on or near important landing fields, and more are arriving daily. Vast gasoline stores are being concentrated at all southern Romanian airports, and crews and carpenters are working long hours on buildings, hangars, and storehouses for munitions and bombs. Civil airports such as Bena Sefo near Bucharest have been taken over by German air units. Within the last week, the Nazis have inaugurated an elaborate 24-hour defense of all Romanian airports as they have occupied. Their latest defense weapons are fast little tanks bearing powerful anti-aircraft guns. Acting on a German suggestion, the Romanian General Staff ordered new air raid drills in Bucharest. Most Danubian towns are now blacked out nightly. The possibility that Nazi bombers might go to the aid of Italy against Greece was also noted, and it was remarked that Salonika lies only 250 miles by air from such Romanian fields as the one at Craiova on the Danube. New York, January 18th. The British Broadcasting Corporation, quoting a Lion source, said today that the entire Italian railway system had been placed at the disposal of the General Staff for transport of troops. The broadcast was heard by NBC. Berlin, January 19th. Karl Megerle, chief editorial mouthpiece of the Foreign Office, gave notice today to the United States in an editorial of the Boursitung that Germany would not let itself be provoked no matter how hard America tried to pick a quarrel. Megerle said that America, with a chip on his shoulder, would not deter Germany from carrying on the fight for freedom and justice for young nations until victory. He lashed out at Secretary of State Hull and charged Hull and President Roosevelt with introducing a foreign policy which will result in an incalculable precedent in world politics. Referring to Secretary Hull's charge that Germany has determined upon a policy of unlimited conquest, Megerle asked if America or the English Empire were founded by treaties, prayers, peaceful discussions, or by force and war. Rome, January 18th. The charge that the United States already is carrying out war against the Axis powers and the tripartite pact according to its interests and the means at its disposal was made today by one of Benito Mussolini's ministers. This accusation, written by Education Minister Giuseppe Bottai in his Critica Fascista, was part of a wave of attacks on American aid to Britain in the Italian press. Bottai said everyone makes war as he wishes and can, and added the United States is carrying out a war against the Axis powers and the tripartite pact of Germany, Italy, and Japan according to its interests and the means at its disposal. In vain does Roosevelt, in one of his last speeches, seek to maintain that open American aid to Great Britain does not constitute an act of war. Virginio Gaeta, the highly placed commentator for Il Giornale d'Italia, said American interventionists, by their intense activity, were hoping to provoke the Axis powers into reaction, which would then be passed off as a new aggressive move to which the United States would have to reply by force. He then declared, "Who is the aggressor? Nobody in Europe is molesting the United States. What obscure spirit of aggression is moving North American war currents against the Axis powers? What alibi to hide their premeditated aggression and pass it off as a necessary defense of life and honor can these currents, which already have gone voluntarily against the rights of the people and the neutrality still seek?" The authoritative Relazioni Internazionali called the friends and associates of the English across the ocean moral aggressors. Mexico City, January 18th. Foreign Minister Ezequiel Padilla declared tonight that Mexico and the United States are pressing our negotiations toward an early agreement on all issues confronting the two nations, animated by a spirit of cordial collaboration. He underscored Mexico's determination to retain sovereignty over any naval bases constructed in Mexico in collaboration with the United States, but declared there had been no concrete proposals on mutual defense needs. Managua, Nicaragua, January 18th. General Jose Maria Zelaya, Minister of Agriculture, announced today that on the recommendation of the United States rubber experts, 2 experimental stations will be started on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua to learn if trees yielding a good grade of rubber can be grown in commercial quantities. The rubber experts, who spent a month in Nicaragua, left yesterday for Guatemala and Mexico, but are expected to return to organize the stations. London, January 18th. The relation of purchasing power to supplies is presenting the British government with a problem which is steadily becoming more acute. The latest issue of the Ministry of Labor Gazette shows in the 11 months of last year to the end of November, £2 million, or about $8 million, was added to the full-time weekly wage bill of industries employing about 7,800,000 persons. The figure does not include overtime or bonus payments or deductions for short-time work, but it is estimated the aggregate additions to wages since the outbreak of the war have ranged up to more than £100 million, or about $400 million annually, despite the mobilization of men in the fighting services. London, January 18th. Men 36 years of age were registered by Great Britain today for military duty, bringing to about 3 million the total called to arms. Approximately 2,600,000 had been registered previously. London, January 18th. An onion auctioned at a football match brought $12.42 for the Sheffield War Fund. Onions, scarce now, have a controlled price of 10 cents a pound. London, January 18th. The British government is about to take energetic action against disaffection in war factories, the Tribune learned tonight. Legislation empowering the government to take over and regiment all industrial labor on totalitarian lines already exists, but it is not expected that Ernest Bevin, Minister of Labor, who is a former trades union boss, will be anxious to hurry its application. A more likely course of action is the clamping down on communist agitation, which has been growing steadily here, particularly since the inauguration last week of the communist-supported People's Convention. This agitation is believed to be behind the various strikes and dissensions in factories whose war production is regarded as vital to the war effort. Today's front page headline in the Daily Worker: Communist Oregon warns workers industrial conscription threat develops. Other papers, however, said that Bevin has rejected the plan for conscription of industrial labor and favors a plan of effective mobilization and the possible transfer of dock labor in cooperation with the trades union concerned. Editorially, the Daily Worker denounces Wendell Willkie's endorsement of the demand by President Roosevelt for dictatorial powers which even the capitalist press has admitted will make him the greatest warlord of all time. This shameless farce of democracy, as the men of Wall Street play it, reaches a new low level with Willkie's statement, the paper comments. The naked swindle of this false democracy stands plain for all to see. The forces of big business unite to impose a dictatorship on the American people and drag them thus chained into a world struggle of empires for redivision and domination of the world, for a world made safe for rich men of the City of London and of Wall Street. London, January 18th. With stocks of imported wines, particularly French, dwindling rapidly, there has recently been such a big buying rush that wine dealers have instituted an unofficial rationing. Not only have wines from France, Germany, and Italy been cut off, but imports from Spain, Portugal, and the British Dominions have been heavily restricted. London, January 18th. Minister of Home Security Herbert Morrison today announced details of the government's new fire watching scheme whereby every able-bodied man and woman in Britain between the ages of 16 and 60 may be called up for compulsory air raid precautions service. Though it is intended for the present to conscript men only in certain areas where the risk of fire is the greatest, Morrison reminded women it is within the power of the government to call on them to give similar service. Vichy, France, January 18th. The French government today suspended the Municipal Council of Corbeil, Algeria, for opposing the work of national restoration. Vichy, France, January 18th. Jean Force, a dismissed farm employee, today was sentenced to death at Clermont-Ferrand for having fired the home and stables of his former employer, causing 500,000 francs damage. The mistress of the house and her children escaped the flames. The owner is a war prisoner. Vichy, France, January 18th. Epinard, famous French racehorse, has been discovered at Chartres, being used as a carriage horse, the Lion edition of the Paris Sior said today. The 21-year-old horse was stolen from his stable during the confusion of the German advance, the paper said. Epinard invaded the United States for a series of international races in 1924. He finished second in each of the three events, losing to Wise Counselor in a 6-furlong dash at Belmont Park, to Ladkin in a mile race at Aqueduct, and to Sarrazin in a 1.25 mile event in Latonia. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 18th. The United States will not have full equipment for an army of 1,200,000 and heavy equipment for 800,000 more until the end of 1942, more than 23 months distant, William S. Knudsen, director of the Office of Defense Production Management, told Congress today. Knudsen's admission was in contrast to the statement 6 months ago by the War Department that it would have more than 1 million men fully trained and equipped to take the field with the latest type of weapons by July 1st, 1941. The Army today has about 500,000 men in training without adequate equipment. Knudsen was the first witness before the House Foreign Affairs Committee who is not a member of President Roosevelt's cabinet. He said the defense program is progressing fairly well. I think we are doing as well as could be expected, he told the committee, which is considering Bill 1776 to give the chief executive war dictatorship powers. Knudsen indirectly criticized Mr. Roosevelt's selection of two heads, himself and Sidney Hillman, to guide defense production. I am not fully satisfied with the progress on the defense program, he told the committee, But I think we are doing as well as could be expected. The real showing won't start until the machine tooling is ready. It is coming in now. Representative John M. Voorhees, Republican, Ohio, asked if Knudsen ever before had worked with an organization that had two heads. Well, where I have worked before, Knudsen said simply, we had a chairman. Representative Edith N. Rogers, Republican, Massachusetts, asked Knudsen, do you believe, as an extremely successful businessman, that the American people are willing to make the supplies for Great Britain without specific collateral? I'm not in the finance business, evaded Knudsen. My job is to make business. Pressed for a more direct answer, Knudsen declared, it's nice to have collateral, but aren't we beyond that situation? I think we are doing this to protect the United States. The broad-shouldered, genial executive avoided efforts of minority members of the committee to draw him into a discussion of how England would repay American aid to Britain. The difficulty is largely that of dollar exchange, asked Representative Robert B. Chipperfield, Republican of Illinois. I think that's so, Knudsen replied. Then why not just repeal the cash provision of the Neutrality Act? Well, of course you could do that, the witness answered. Why wouldn't we accomplish as much, then, by repealing that and the Johnson Act? Before Knudsen could reply, Chairman Saul Bloom interrupted, insisting there is no mention of cash in the Neutrality Act. Finally, Bloom permitted the question, and Knudsen said, I don't see any difference, sir, between this act and your statement. Exactly, said Chipperfield. So we could then do without giving so much authority to one man. Mr. Knudsen drew laughter from the crowd when he answered, I can't answer that question, sir. That one man happens to be my boss. Asked if British replacement of loaned or leased material after the war would not tend to depress American manufacturing, Knudsen said that would depend upon the manner in which American industry was switched back to domestic production. It is up to Congress, he said, to decide how the costs of the program are to be borne. Washington, D.C., January 18th. Substantial speeding up of the output of warplanes and light tanks under pressure of American and British demands was reported officially today. American aircraft plants turned out 799 planes of all military types in December, John D. Biggers of the new Office of Production Management disclosed. January production should exceed this total modestly, he said. The output of 13-ton light tanks for the Army was described as more than 4 months ahead of schedule. The plane figures exceeded by some 14% the advance estimate of William S. Knudsen, co-director of the Office of Defense Production Management, who told the National Association of Manufacturers last month that delays had forced a scaling down of expectations to a rate of only 700 a month by January 1st. Mr. Knudsen's statement jolted everybody into extra effort, and there were certain other favorable factors, Biggers told reporters. The production step-up report was made in connection with the naming of officials of the OPM production division headed by Biggers. Biggers, a Toledo glass manufacturer, explained that the top office of production management, which President Roosevelt created last month with Knudsen and Sidney Hillman as joint directors, was an operating organization rather than advisory like the Defense Commission. The OPM includes Biggers Production Division, a division of purchasing under Donald M. Nelson, and Priorities Division headed by Edward R. Stettinius, Jr., which is empowered to enforce compliance with defense orders by regulating distribution of materials and transportation. The production division will have the responsibility of accelerating the manufacture of arms of all kinds and, as outlined by Biggers, may be destined to expand into an agency of thousands of officials and employees. The aircraft section alone, which under the Defense Commission had a total personnel of only 8, already has added 77 others, and Biggers said he was afraid this expansion was typical. In an address, Biggers tonight urged the nation's manufacturers, large and small, to cooperate in a census of plant facilities to be taken next week by the National Industrial Council, sponsored by the National Association of Manufacturers. Washington, D.C., January 18th. President Roosevelt's request for $313,500,000 to finance construction of 200 cargo ships won quick approval today of a House Appropriations Subcommittee, and officials predicted House enactment of the legislation early next week. Before acting on the measure, the subcommittee heard Chairman Emery S. Land of the Maritime Commission describe the project as vital to the nation's defense. Committee members said, however, that Land declined to answer on the grounds that it was out of his jurisdiction. Questions as to whether the new ships, to cost a total of $350 million, were intended for transfer to Britain or would replace existing ships which might be transferred. San Francisco, California, January 18th. An American sailor ripped a huge swastika flag from its staff at the ninth-story offices of the German consulate today while thousands of spectators stood in the street and cheered. The action, which Consular General Fritz Wiedemann reported immediately to the German embassy in Washington, climaxed a morning of unrest around the building at 2600 Farrell Street, just off Market. The flag was being flown in observance of the 70th anniversary of the founding of the German Reich. The sailor was identified by police as Captain Joseph Walsh, as Harold James Sturtevant, 22, recently a fireman on the destroyer Craven. He and a companion, E.G. Lackey, age 23, seaman first class, formerly on the destroyer Perkins, were charged with malicious mischief and held for the United States Navy. 4 other young men who participated were released. Sturtevant and Lackey were on shore leave awaiting mustering out of service. They were in civilian clothing. The crowd began forming shortly after the Nazi emblem was unfurled when the consulate opened. As the morning advanced, the crowd grew larger until 2,000 persons were gazing at the 4 by 6 foot flag. Police were kept busy explaining to protesting spectators that international law permitted the consulate to fly the German flag without also displaying an American emblem. As the crowd grew, a small American flag was hung from the window of a vacant office directly above the big swastika emblem. A nearby department store brought out a huge American ensign, 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. Several young men who had protested the presence of the Nazi flag to police finally ascended the fire escape to the 9th floor. They entered a 10th-story window and reached the empty office above the flagpole. The crowd, which by then filled O'Farrell Street and overflowed into Market Street, alternately cheered and held its breath while Sturtevant let himself down to the flagpole. With a penknife, he began slashing at the halyard. When the rope was cut, he attempted to pull in the flag, but Dr. Otto Danzer and other in the consulate grabbed the bottom hem. Shouting at the Germans, Sturtevant leaned down and slashed the flag in several places. Finally, Sturtevant's companions were able to grab a corner of the ensign, and a brief tug-of-war between stories ensued. The consulate employees got most of the flag, which was badly torn in the middle and missing a corner. The crowd let out a roar as the emblem disappeared, then continued cheering as Sturtevant climbed back through the window. The Consul General, World War Commander of Adolf Hitler, declined comment beyond saying the facts speak for themselves. Washington, D.C., January 18th. The American Legion announced tonight that Milo J. Warner, its national commander, will head a delegation of 3 Legionnaires who will visit Great Britain and study problems of civilian defense. Warner will select the other 2 members of the group. The State Department agreed today to issue passports for the visit. Palm Beach, Florida, January 18th. Palm Beach has gone to war as far as it will go. Men are drinking cocktails for the consternation of Hitler, women are knitting socks, and restaurants call German fried potatoes, Potatoes O'Brien. Washington, D.C., January 18th. Thousands of folks, political leaders, and lesser party workers, and people great and humble crowded into Washington today, bent upon taking a spectator's part in the 3rd inauguration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt at noon Monday. They thronged the hotel lobbies from fashionable places to $1-a-night walk-ups and overflowed into the tourist camps and houses bearing the familiar sign, Tourists. Long before nightfall, it was obvious that the ever-growing crowds were intent upon a gay pre-inaugural such as the Capitol had seldom seen. The city was bedecked with flags and bunting. The weatherman predicted Monday would be clear and cold. The central figure of the nation's great quadrennial spectacle, President Roosevelt, the only man in the nation's history to take the oath of office 3 times, was busy at the White House. He received no visitors and spent the day among the ship pictures of the Oval study on the second floor of the executive mansion, relaxing and preparing his inaugural speech. The address will be short, White House attaches said, not more than 12 minutes. It was explained that the president already had expressed his latest views at length in his fireside radio chat of December 29th and in his opening message to Congress on January 6th. It was announced there would be 26 House guests at the White House for the inauguration, many of whom already had arrived, including virtually the entire Roosevelt family, the Democratic branch of it, that is, and close family friends. At 9:30 a.m. Chicago time Monday, President Roosevelt will attend services at St. John's Episcopal Church. Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt will leave the White House for the Capitol at 10:30. Henry A. Wallace will take the oath as Vice President at 10:55. The President will take the oath of office at 11 a.m., deliver his inaugural address, and return to the White House. A buffet luncheon for 1,000 guests will be served at the White House at noon. At 12:45 p.m., the inaugural parade will begin from the Capitol. The President will receive governors at the White House at 3 p.m., and at 4 p.m., there will be tea for 1,000 guests at the White House. The inauguration program will begin tomorrow, meaning Sunday, at 1:30 p.m. Chicago time. The Lafayette Square reviewing stands will be the scene of a brief interdenominational church service. The Reverend Dr. John Keating, Roman Catholic, Rabbi Norman Gerstenfeld, the Reverend Seth R. Brooks, Universalist, and the Reverend Albert J. McCarthy, Presbyterian, all of Washington, will participate. At 3 p.m., Joseph E. Davies, former ambassador to Russia and Belgium and now chairman of the inaugural committee, and Mrs. Davies will give a reception to the governors of the states. Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt have been invited, as have been Mr. and Mrs. Hoover. A dinner will be given at the Mayflower Hotel at 6 p.m. by the Electoral College for 1,500 persons. Attorney General Robert H. Jackson, Josephus Daniels, ambassador to Mexico, Edward J. Flynn, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, will be the speakers. At 7:45 p.m., there will be an inaugural gala at Constitution Hall. Charlie Chaplin will deliver a speech from his movie The Great Dictator. Eddie Cantor, Irving Berlin, Nelson Eddy, Raymond Massey, Mickey Rooney, Ethel Barrymore, and Ry Stevens are on the program. Robert Sherwood, a friend of the president, will be master of ceremonies. Boston, Massachusetts, January 18th. A campaign to persuade Congress to oppose adoption of the St. Lawrence Seaway project advocated by President Roosevelt will be launched in Washington next week, an opposition spokesman said tonight. Frank S. Davies, manager of the Boston Maritime Association and newly chosen chairman of the executive committee of the National St. Lawrence Project Conference, said the group would meet at the Capitol to lay the groundwork for discussions of the measure with the House and Senate members. He said the new organization planned to establish headquarters in Washington and carry on a fight to the finish against the proposal. Albuquerque, New Mexico, January 18th. Albert B. Fall, 79 years old, former Secretary of the Interior, was reported in a serious condition with bronchial pneumonia in United States Veterans Hospital tonight. His daughters, Mrs. C.C. Chase and Mrs. Jewett Elliott, were summoned to his bedside. Elkton, Maryland, January 18th. Glenn Doyle, 42-year-old wife-beater, flinched under 10 lashes of a cat o' nine tails in the Cecil County jail yard today in the first public whipping here since 1894. Sheriff David J. Randolph wielded the whip before about 40 witnesses. Doyle, a carpenter, was sentenced December 16th to 60 days imprisonment and 10 lashes for beating his wife Marie and his 8-year-old daughter Pearl. New York, January 18th. Battered by a hurricane off Cape Hatteras, which nearly centered at the bottom last Monday, the American freighter Otho was safe in Brooklyn today, minus part of her cargo and some of her equipment, but with the passengers and crew of 37 safe. Captain Dwight Smith, who brought the crippled craft in last night, described the storm as a humdinger. He said he had skippered 10 steamers and a schooner through many a storm, but had never come so close to losing his ship as this. Smith said the wind was so strong that the ship was blown backward, her bow submerged while motors were running full speed ahead. He said a 65-mile-an-hour northwest wind with waves 30 feet high had snapped steel like ribbons, smashed a 5-ton motor launch, crippled the steering gear, and caused destruction or jettisoning of a quarter of the cargo, including palm oil. Norristown, Pennsylvania, January 18th. Girl quadruplets were born prematurely today to Mrs. Mary Iannoni, 34 years old, but 3 died less than 2 hours later. Dr. B.I. Falcone said the quadruplets were 7-month babies. He said he believed the 4th would live. Well, happy birthday. Yuma, Arizona, January 18th. Linda Hayes, featured player under contract to the RKO Studios today, was married here to radio announcer Lou Crosby. The ceremony, performed in the Presbyterian Church by Dr. R.C. Atchison, was witnessed by Mr. and Mrs. Norris Goff of Hollywood. Goff, who was best man, is formerly known to radio fans as Abner of Lum and Abner. The couple announced they will spend the next 3 weeks or so in or near Palm Springs, California. Miss Hayes, about a year ago, was divorced from musician Dominique Germano. It also was Crosby's second matrimonial venture. Well, happy anniversary. And now for local and regional news. Volunteers continued yesterday to classify and forward to Illinois congressmen thousands of names of Americans joining in an intensive drive against the Roosevelt War dictatorship bill. From their regular occupations, the volunteers hurried over to work in the offices of the America First Committee and the Citizens Keep America Out of War Committee. These committees reported that 328,000 names, divided about equally between the two groups, have been assembled. In its new offices at 122 South Michigan Avenue, the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee welcomed 15 typists and 10 other volunteers for the work. More than 60% of the names which came in yesterday were received by telephone. The America First Committee chapter will be on the job today. The telephone numbers are Wabash 5473, 5474, 5475, 5476, and 5477. All the original letters are being forwarded to United States Senator Scott W. Lucas, Democrat, who, in his 1938 campaign, pledged that he would never vote a dime to pull the chestnuts of foreign nations out of the fire. Senator Waylon Brooks, Republican, is being notified of all communications, as are the 25 district congressmen and 2 representatives at large for Illinois. Mrs. Janet Ayer Fairbank, vice chairman of the Chicago chapter, yesterday urged patriots to pay heed to the statement of Senator Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, that England is insisting that the United States enter the war at once. Suddenly we see exposed the entire long, careful campaign to get us into the war, Mrs. Fairbanks said. Miss Jasmine Hoagland, executive vice president of the Roll Call of the American Women, which recently merged with the America First Committee, departed yesterday for Washington, D.C., bearing a red, white, and blue book containing the names of 11,000 members. She will present it to Congressman at large William G. Stratton, who will give it to Senator Walter F. George, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A unit of the America First Committee has been formed at the Heinz Memorial Hospital for Disabled Veterans, it was announced. This fight is by no means hopeless if the people will make themselves heard, said Captain William J. Grace, chairman of the Citizens Keep America Out of War Committee. The fight is in the same stage now as was the successful fight against the League of Nations in 1920. If we can hold out against the forces of internationalism, we can win again. Captain Grace announced that O.K. Armstrong of Springfield, Missouri, former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the American Legion, will be the second speaker at a mass meeting in the Auditorium Theater next Sunday night. The first speaker will be Senator Gerald P. Nye, Republican, North Dakota. Earl Southard, secretary of the committee, said this organization has assumed a tremendous task in the gathering of millions of protests against the trend toward war. Our plan is to get as many signatures as the number of votes President Roosevelt received last November, Southard said. The vote then was no mandate because there was no opportunity to vote on the war issue. two heirs of Woodrow Wilson's internationalism put on a shadowboxing contest. Real Americans had no choice because Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie agreed in substance that America should go back and become a crown colony of the British Empire. Meanwhile, the opposing group, the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies, reported that it has obtained thousands of signatures to a petition urging congressmen to pass the president's bill without delay. Two of the 9 Cook County draft boards scheduled to furnish men for induction into the Army next Thursday have filled their quotas entirely with volunteers, it was announced at county draft headquarters yesterday. The 9 boards on the north and near northwest sides will send 151 men to the induction. 95 of these will be volunteers. The order numbers of the drafted men show that the 9 boards had to go through a total of 379 registrants to obtain 56 men. This makes the proportion of 1A men available for immediate service 15% or less than 1 in 6. The ratios of individual boards, however, ranged from 1 in 3 to 1 in 9. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, January 18th. Ski troop units hunting suitable weather in which to train for winter warfare found snow and near zero temperatures upon their arrival here today. The troops came to camp in 3 trains and a motor convoy of 80 trucks. By tomorrow, 1,400 will have arrived from their former headquarters at Camp Brady and Fort Custer, Michigan. The men make up a special battalion of the 5th Division. They will train in snowshoe ski and sled patrol work and test equipment suitable for winter fighting. Attempts will be made to devise new tactics. The troops moved into winterized tents. The sides of each tent, accommodating 4 men, have been windproofed with boarding and tar paper. There is a stove in each tent. Lieutenant Colonel Fred M. Distelhorst is a camp commander. Chicago companies shared in national defense orders and contracts placed yesterday, but the biggest award of the day was made by the War Department to the Buick division of General Motors Corporation for $36,497,520 of airplane engines. The Navy Department announced that its contract with Foote Brothers Gear and Machine Company, Chicago, for expansion of plant equipment has been increased to $1,940,000 from $1,020,000. The company has subcontracts to make gears for manufacturers of airplane motors. Buda, company of Harvey, received from the Navy an order for $421,680 of switchboard generator sets. Nye Tool and Machine Works, Chicago, received a Navy order for $16,964 of stock dies. The United States Housing Authority approved a $1,248,420 contract with the Henke Construction Company, Chicago, for construction of 2 housing projects in Cairo, Illinois. Harlow H. Curtis, General Manager for Buick, said that negotiations are in progress, which will increase to approximately $125 million, the total value of aircraft engines and spare parts to be manufactured by the company. He said approval has been given for plans to build and equip a new plant for the production of a 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney air-cooled engines currently used in medium bombers. Curtis said the plant will produce about 500 engines a month under normal operations and will employ about 10,000 persons. Location of the plant has not been definitely announced. Dwight H. Green was in Chicago as governor of Illinois for the first time last night. Returning from the strenuous inauguration and the start of his Republican administration in Springfield, he went to his apartment at 3400 Lakeshore Drive. He will return to the duties of state tomorrow morning. Recovered from a cold, Governor Green walked out of the train shed at Union Station and swept into his arms his 2 daughters, Nancy, 13 years old, and Gloria, age 8. Mrs. Green followed suit. Green's train on the Chicago and Alton line was an hour and 22 minutes late, but he said he was too glad to see his children to be annoyed about this. He and Mrs. Green agreed that the 83-year-old executive mansion in Springfield will make a fine home when repairs have been made. At present, the governor noted wood pillars on jacks in the basement help support the old building. Springfield, Illinois, January 18th. Appointees of John Stell during his 100 days as governor began to file out of the State House for the last time this noon as the weekend lull settled down on the new administration of Governor Dwight H. Green. Several in a group of 24 in the Department of Conservation, knowing that letters of dismissal effective on Monday, were waiting at their Springfield addresses, and they wouldn't look in the mailbox before starting out for their hometowns to spend Sunday with the folks. News of the dismissals was contained in the official announcement by Frank G. Thompson of Mount Vernon, who takes office with 7 other Green cabinet members on Monday. It became known that with few exceptions, all 24 were given brief stays on the payroll while Stell was playing Santa Claus. Most of them went into vacancies which the Horner administration found it unnecessary to fill. Emmett McGuire, a township highway commissioner, was locked up in the Joliet police station last night on a charge of disorderly conduct after he appeared to intercede in behalf of a prisoner. Police Captain Ernest Overby said McGuire had become abusive when he refused his demands to release William McEwen of 1217 North Raynor Avenue, Joliet, who had been arrested on a charge of driving his automobile while intoxicated. McGuire served as campaign manager in Will County for former Governor Stell in the last primary when Stell was defeated by Harry B. Hershey for the Democratic nomination for governor. There are 2 ways to get a job on the construction of the $45 million munitions plants, which the government is starting in Will County. Under the first method, workers whose trades are not unionized are interviewed by skillful members of the personnel staffs of the 2 contracting firms which are setting up the plant. They are hired or rejected on merit alone, and no strings are attached to the jobs. The job classifications so handled include supervisors, surveyors, timekeepers, guards, watchmen, and clerks. But the second group, composed of men whose trades are unionized, are not so fortunate. The contracting firms Stone & Webster Engineering Corporation, with offices near Elwood, and the Sanderson and Porter Engineering Company, whose headquarters are near Wilmington, turned these applicants over to state and union employees who decide the terms on which they shall be hired. First, each man seeking a job in union-controlled trades is told at the company offices that the government plan for hiring stipulates, number 1, that he must register with the state employment office nearest his home, number 2, join the local union of his trade, number 3, wait for a telephone call to come to work, and number 4, that 75% of those hired must be from Will and Grundy counties. This last provision, according to men loitering about the field offices, was decreed by Tony Augustino, president of Local 75 of the Laborers Union in Will and Grundy counties. To get the approval of the state employment office and of Augustino, the prospective worker must go to Joliet, 12 miles from Elwood and 18 miles from Wilmington. At the employment office, 120 Scott Street, he may find as many as 200 job seekers waiting for credentials, with 12 interviewers taking the required information on which the OK will be based. One of the requirements is that the applicant must produce a Social Security card. This may be had, if lacking, from the Joliet post office. The telephone number is demanded. It was explained at the state office because the manager will not let men loiter about the office waiting for his call. This is just a beginning. The applicant, if a laborer, must still make his arrangements with Augustino, who has an office at 508 North Chicago Avenue, Joliet. Augustino, the acknowledged labor boss of the Joliet area for 20 years, informed a typical applicant that he can go to work only if he agrees to pay $1 a day for 21 days to the union, $15 as a membership fee, and $6 as dues for 3 months. No payment in advance is required by the boss. A carpenter must go to the office of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners at 101 West Jefferson Street, Joliet. The union's initiation fee is $100 payable, $20 a week for 5 weeks. A plasterer's initiation fee is $80 payable in 6 installments, and a sheet metal worker's $152.50, $10 from the first paycheck, and $5 weekly after that. An electrician's fee to join the union is $300 at the rate of $22.50 every 3 months, plus 3% of his wages. Between 300 and 400 men have gone to work on the two projects this week. It is believed, however, that less than 75% are from Will and Grundy counties, as applicants from other territories have been adopting local addresses and phone numbers to get work. It was reported that one Joliet resident offers for $1 to let any applicant use his home as a clearinghouse for messages. One young man was frank in saying he had given a fake name and telephone number and a work record that really belonged to a friend. He explained that he was desperate for a job. He and others said the interviewers at the state employment office were slower and easier to deceive than the trained personnel force maintained by the contractors. The state employment staff is under civil service and no questions on political affiliations are asked. Agents of the Federal Alcohol Tax Unit in Chicago were engaged yesterday in an intensive search for the leader of a huge bootlegging syndicate, which was able, through a series of elaborate ruses, to buy supplies by the ton and market its products in truckloads. E.C. Yellowlee, chief of the unit, said the syndicate boss Eli Frank and his associates had connections in Cleveland, Ohio, and other American cities. It previously had been disclosed that much of the Chicago-made liquor was run across the border at Detroit, Michigan, and sold in Canada. Martin S. Gerber, assistant United States attorney, said that Frank, who already is under 2 indictments charging bootlegging, is a brother of Hyman F. Frank, a former Chicagoan who was indicted Friday in Detroit with 34 alleged co-defendants for the Canadian smuggling. A third brother, Morris Frank, is serving an 8-year term in the federal prison for bootlegging. The arrest of Eli Frank was regarded as so important that the arraignment of 6 alleged bootleggers seized here was continued yesterday by United States Commissioner Edwin K. Walker until January 30th to give the agents time to capture the syndicate boss. Frank contracted with one sugar dealer for every delivery of 16,500 pounds of sugar every other day, Yellowlee said. One of Frank's drivers would meet the dealer's driver at an agreed place and drive the truck to a warehouse at 74th Street and Ashland Avenue. The truck would be kept in this place for 2 days. Each morning, a smaller truck would be sent by the gang to take off half the sugar and quantities of yeast, which Frank personally delivered to the warehouse. These raw materials would be taken to a house at 4421 LaSalle Street for fermentation and cooking. The resulting alcohol was taken on the small truck to a public garage at 7519 Exchange Avenue, which was used as a primary distribution station. Frank told the garageman he was a dealer in olive oil. In the garage, the truck cargo would be transferred to other trucks. These were well camouflaged. Tarpaulins and chicken crates were among articles used in concealing the real nature of the loads. Yellowlee said one set of chicken coops made 5 round trips between Chicago and Cleveland with 330 gallons of alcohol concealed among them each time before agents arrested the driver last Wednesday. He said the delivery trucks were trailed by automobiles carrying watchers for the bootleg syndicate whose duty it was to see that there was no interference with the liquor shipments. It was estimated in the Detroit indictments that the syndicate had evaded payment of $2.5 million in internal revenue taxes on alcohol. It was said the syndicate operated 9 trucks in Chicago alone. The organization was so complete that the syndicate had a purchasing agent. Federal alcohol tax agents under Deputy Supervisor Ralph Herrick raided 5 places here Friday and seized the 6 men who were brought before Walker yesterday. They included Louis Lavender, 4908 Drake Avenue, arrested in the house at 4421 LaSalle Street, where a 2,000-gallon still, 2,200 gallons of mash, and 25,000 pounds of sugar also were seized. And Jack Soroka, 44 years old, Harry Segal, 31, Milton Gladstone, 47, who were arrested in the garage at 7519 Exchange Avenue. 2 trucks were seized in the garage. In a third raid at 6421 Normal Avenue, William York, age 30, and Harry Anderson, 35, were arrested. Small caches of alcohol were found in garages behind 610 East 63rd Street and 6442 Halstead Street. Commissioner Walker set bond for Anderson and York at $3,500 each and fixed that of the other 4 at $2,500 each. A warrant was issued yesterday for Eli Frank's appearance January 30th before Commissioner Walker. His arraignment on the two indictments naming him has been set for February 4th. The indictments were returned last June and last September in Chicago. Word awaited for weeks along Randolph Street came yesterday. The future of many a handbook had hung in the balance as a whisper was awaited from Jaime Loudmouth Levin, who was to spread the tidings, if tidings there were, that happy days had come again. But the tidings were sad. That eerie cry heard along the Rialto was not caused by the chill winds. It was the bootmaker's lament. Loudest were the shrieks that came from the now emptied horse parlors. Parlors where Jaime was the factotum for Frank the Enforcer Nitty Gang Boss. Attorney General George F. Barrett had spoken. Mr. Barrett will go to Belleville next Wednesday and personally appear before Judge Maurice V. Joyce of the Circuit Court and ask the appointment of a special officer to serve summonses on Cook County defendants in the Bookie injunction case, said an announcement from Attorney General Barrett's office. To Jaime and others of his calling that was almost a death knell. Former Attorney General John E. Cassidy had obtained from the Belleville judge an injunction restraining Jaime and 1,379 others from accepting bets on horse races. That was on December 3rd. The hope of the bookies was that Cassidy's successor wouldn't have had a bad opinion of them if Barrett, who was to take over the office and the power as well as the title, would only be a bit tolerant of the local boys. Would only be a bit tolerant, the local boys would not be afraid of what Judge Joyce of Belleville, nearly 300 miles away, might do to them, and so they lived in hope. Meanwhile, our sheriff, Thomas J. O'Brien, reported his deputies unable to find many of the men against whom Cassidy had obtained injunctions from the Belleville judge. To date, according to the Attorney General's office, the O'Brien deputies have notified only 41 of the 1,380 defendants. Judge Joyce's injunction against handbook gambling was issued on the theory that a statewide conspiracy existed to violate laws, it was explained. The sheriffs of all other counties served the writs sent to them, Barrett's office reported. All the resources of the Attorney General's office will be used henceforth to make certain that all of these summonses and writs of injunction are properly served, said Barrett himself. P.S. 10 handbooks in the loop were raided yesterday by policemen in the Central District and the Morals Division of Commissioner Allman's office. In each instance, employees were arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. The Central District squad won 3 times to 1 handbook at 29 Quincy Street and found operations in progress each time. The employees seized in the third raid were held in the station overnight without booking. 2 Highwood cab drivers pleaded guilty before County Judge Perry L. Persons in Waukegan yesterday to a charge of assaulting Private Leroy Polzin, 22 years old, of Company D, 2nd Infantry, Fort Sheridan. The 2 are Roland Stanley, age 20, and Peter Murphy, 21, drivers for the Black and White Cab Company. They attacked Polzin Wednesday on the reservation after an argument over a fare. The 2 will appear Wednesday before Judge Persons for sentencing. Murphy was freed on $2,000 bond. Stanley is held in the Lake County Jail. Mayor Charles Portilla of Highwood informed yesterday that Lieutenant Sidney DeLove, Assistant Provost Marshal at the fort, had banned black and white cabs from the fort, announced that he had asked Bernard Juran, city attorney, to prepare a new taxicab ordinance for presentation to the city council on February 7th. The mayor said the new ordinance would include moral standards for drivers and provisions for revocation of licenses. D.C. Stephenson, former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan of Indiana, was returned to the Michigan City prison last night to continue serving his life sentence for the murder of Madge Oberholzer in 1925. Stephenson had been in a hospital in LaPorte, Indiana since December when he underwent an operation. While in the hospital, Stephenson requested a parole or pardon. This was denied a week ago by the Indiana State Clemency Commission, and not under commission rules. He may not renew the request for 2 years. A trusted young male stenographer confessed yesterday that he plotted a holdup in which bandits fired at his employer, Harry D. Crooks, and robbed Crooks of $2,800 in Christmas bonus money, which he was about to distribute to other employees 2 days before Christmas. Crooks is president of Crooks Terminal Warehouses Incorporated and a $1 a year man in charge of all warehousing activities connected with national defense. The stenographer is Andrew Rusnick, 26 years old, of 5601 South California Avenue. He has worked for Crooks for 7 years. 4 men have been arrested as a result of Rusnick's confession, according to Captain Daniel Gilbert, chief investigator for the state's attorney's police. All of them, Gilbert said, have confessed. Crooks put the money in $10 and $20 bills in an envelope and slipped it into the inside pocket in the afternoon of the robbery in the office of one of his warehouses at 5967 65th Street, clearing. Then he stepped into his car to go to another warehouse to make the distribution. 4 men waiting in a car near the warehouse pursued him, suspecting a robbery attempt. Crooks locked the doors of his car. The pursuers forced his automobile to the curb, smashed the windows, and took the money. They knew precisely where to look for it, in the inside pocket. As they were driving off, Crooks gave chase. The gunman fired back at him. They finally escaped after a race of several miles. Gilbert suspected that someone close to Crooks had aided the men because they knew when he was leaving the warehouse and where he carried the money. The investigators asked all employees in the warehouse to take a lie detector test the next day. Rusnick failed to report and could not be found for 2 days. Later, he went to Gilbert's office with an attorney offering to surrender. Gilbert told the secretary he was not wanted, but had detectives keep watch over him. Last Monday night, Rusnick was arrested in a tavern brawl. He was found to be carrying a gun. He was questioned under the lie detector. Early yesterday, according to Gilbert, Rusnick confessed that he had planned the robbery. Sergeants Joseph Healy, Ernest Slowey, and Nicholas Distledorf of Gilbert's office rounded up the men Rusnick named. They are Joseph Phillips, 23 years old, of 1265 Cabrini Street, Lawrence Columbos, 25, of 803 South Loomis Street, Dominic Leno, 27, of 819 South Carpenter Street, and Salvatore Vecchioni, age 26, of 1337 Flournoy Street. Jack Powers, 30 years old, was shot in the left side when he grappled with one of 2 bandits who attempted to hold him up as he sat in his car with Miss Doris Beal, age 22, near her home at 3723 Irving Park Road early today. The bandit opened the car door and ordered Powers to move over. Powers lunged at the bandit and the 2 grappled in the street. In the scuffle, Powers was shot. The bandits fled and Powers was taken to the American Hospital after being treated by Dr. Abraham Kushner of 3738 Irving Park Road. Powers, a salesman, lives at 527 Woodbine Avenue, Oak Park. Joseph Ciez, 19 years old, is a pretty good shot with a BB gun. He demonstrated it last night in the basement of his home at 5155 South Racine Avenue. Lacking a target, he took a cartridge for a .22 caliber rifle and fixed it in a vise. Then he stepped back, aimed the air gun, and squeezed the trigger. A lead pellet struck the fixed cartridge and exploded it. The bullet ricocheted off 2 walls and cracked Joseph on the jaw. The police said the injury was not serious. While her husband looked on, Mrs. Leona Martin, 29 years old, of Madison, Wisconsin, a bride of a week, leaped to her death last night from the 29th floor of the tower of the Morrison Hotel. Her body landed on the roof of the 4th floor offset over a storeroom. The woman's husband, Clyde, 39, who said he was a professional labor mediator, said there had been no quarrel and that he could not explain his wife's act. He said they had driven to Chicago earlier in the evening on a honeymoon business trip. With them were his brother, William, and his wife. Clyde Martin said he went to the hotel barbershop and that when he returned to the room some time later, he saw his wife leap out of the window just as he opened the door. He located his brother and then notified hotel detectives. Mrs. Martin was a former hospital technician in Madison. Both she and Martin had been married before. Police last night sought 3 masked bandits who yesterday afternoon took jewelry valued at more than $4,000 and $100 in cash in a daring robbery in the offices of Massover Brothers Jewelry Manufacturers on the 15th floor at 30 West Washington Street. The bandits herded Samuel S. Massover, 65 years old, 7010 North Ashland Avenue, president of the firm, his son Hyman, 36, of 6157 North Richmond Street, secretary, and three other persons into an anteroom and then shoved a steel cabinet against the door as a barricade. The Massovers finally managed to dislodge the cabinet barricade and notify police of the holdup. There were 1,652 cases of measles reported in Chicago from January 1st through January 16th. Dr. Herman N. Bunsen, president of the City Board of Health, announced yesterday. In the entire month of January 1940, only 69 cases were reported. The disease usually reaches epidemic or near epidemic form once every 3 years, Dr. Bunsen said, exhausting susceptibilities and then lowering its prevalence until a new group of susceptibilities has grown. The disease is generally acquired by older children and transmitted to younger brothers and sisters, Dr. Bunsen said. He suggested that mothers segregate children who have the disease. It manifests itself in running eyes and nose, a slight cough, and eventually a rash. Pneumonia often develops. A coating of ice made roads dangerous throughout much of the Middle West last night, according to a warning from the Chicago Motor Club. In Illinois, the ice extended south to Springfield. The ice covered most of lower Michigan, most of Indiana, the northern half of Iowa, and all of Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, and Minnesota. Ohio was having snow and rain, which colder weather threatened to turn into ice on the highways. Leaders of business and civic agencies to be represented on a committee which will be asked by Congressman Charles S. Dewey to work for the creation of a lakefront airport for Chicago joined yesterday in endorsing the renewal of efforts to obtain such a field. Interest in the project was revived last week by Representative Dewey, Republican of the 9th District near North Side, in a speech before 75 business leaders at a dinner in his honor in the Chicago Athletic Association. Dewey said then that efforts to get a lakefront airport had good chances of success and asked for formation of a committee to include representatives of the Chicago Plan Commission, the Chicago Association of Commerce, and the Illinois Manufacturers Association. W. Homer Hartz, president of the Manufacturers Association, said yesterday that his organization would be glad to cooperate. Chicago needs a lakefront airport if it is to keep to the fore in civic progress, he said. There is no reason why the city should not take the lead as the center of air transportation of the country, just as it is the center of railroad transportation. All Illinois as well as Chicago should sponsor this movement. George T. Horton, chairman of the Plan Commission, said he approved of a lakefront airport and that his commission would make a report on the matter soon. He promised the cooperation of the commission with Congressman Dewey. A.H. Mellinger, president of the Association of Commerce, said that it would consider any plans formulated for an airport near the Loop. A new tumor clinic, one of 7 in Chicago hospitals, will be dedicated at 3 p.m. today in Henrotin Hospital. Dr. Henry L. Jaffe, clinic director, said yesterday the heads of all hospital departments will be on the clinic staff and that both private and charity patients will be accepted. The clinic's equipment includes a deep therapy X-ray machine valued at $10,000, which produces 220,000 volts. The shockproof machine is operated in a lead-lined room by an operator at an outside control board. Radium also will be used. Dr. Joe Vincent Meigs of the Harvard Medical School facility and Dr. Bauman Crowell, assistant director of the American College of Surgeons, will speak at the ceremony today. Half pints of milk for a penny will be available to 100,000 needy children in Chicago's public and parochial elementary schools beginning tomorrow, Mayor Kelly's office announced yesterday. The plan was developed by the Surplus Marketing Administration of the Department of Agriculture after a 2-week test period last June in which 8,000 pupils at 15 schools participated. The Marketing Administration has accepted bids from Chicago dairies. Federal funds will make up the difference in the cost of the milk above the 1 cent charge. The schools will make no profit. The present price is 4 cents a half pint in high schools and 3 in the penny lunchrooms of the elementary schools. The Past Commanders Club of the American Legion will hold its first annual Ice Frolics in the Chicago Arena February 22nd. Dr. Carl F. Steinhoff, president of the group of 1,800 past commanders, announced last night. The show will be presented in cooperation with the Chicago Figure Skating Club. Proceeds of the affair will go to the Underprivileged Boys Camp Fund. Those in charge of the event include Edward Clamage, past state commander, who is chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Frank B. Flannery, chairman of the Distinguished Guest Committee, George Apfel, treasurer, Terry Rose, secretary, and Edward Dean, production director. The first 40 tenants of the $9 million Ida B. Wells housing project for low-income colored families moved in yesterday. Residences will be provided for 1,662 families when the project is completed next June. The first units completed are at 409 to 421 East 37th Street and 500 to 570 East Pershing Road. Mr. and Mrs. Leslie Warren received the first house key from Robert R. Taylor, Vice Chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority. The Warrens, who have two children, Ronald 4 years old and Leslie Jr. 6 months, formerly lived in a substandard dwelling at 446 East 46th Street. Warren is a laborer for a meatpacking company. Tenants, all with incomes averaging less than $900 a year, will pay from $18 to $23 a month rent, including the cost of utilities. 36 residences of 4 1/2 rooms, 3 of 6 1/2 rooms, and 1 with 5 1/2 rooms were occupied yesterday. The project is operated by the Chicago Housing Authority. The Old Time Printers Association of Chicago organized in 1886 to promote a feeling of sociability and good fellowship held its 56th annual dinner dance last night in honor of the 235th anniversary of the birth of Benjamin Franklin. More than 350 printers, each with more than 25 years' experience in the trade, dined and danced in the Boulevard Room of the Stevens Hotel. The oldest printer present was William A. Cahill, 86 years old, president of the Cahill Printing Company, 210 South Des Plaines Avenue. Cahill, a past president of the association, lives at 419 South Ridgeland Avenue, Oak Park. Other past presidents attending were John C. Harding, John H. Quadland, H.A. Davidson, William Sleepak, Fred J. Hagan, W.F. Howe, and F. Fred Bernard. Frank A. Steiger now heads the organization. And in sports, Harold Shapiro, Illinois guard, saved the game, and Art Matheson, Illinois center, won it in overtime 42-41 from Northwestern's Wildcats last night in Evanston High School. A capacity crowd of 2,500 saw the Illini rally to overcome a 7-point deficit with 4 minutes to play and then outscore the Wildcats in overtime. The score at the end of regulation time was 36-36. Northwestern thus still is seeking its first Western Conference victory after 3 games, and Illinois now has 3 conquests against a loss to Indiana. But until the rousing and unexpected finish, the Wildcats seemingly had this battle under control. Even then, the decision was not rendered until after the timer's gun had marked the end of the 5-minute overtime. Just before the gunshot, Clarence Haase was fouled by Shapiro as he lofted the ball from mid-court. But Haase, needing both penalty shots to tie, missed the first. Shapiro, who was substituted for Captain Johnny Drish near the end of the first half, and this was just too bad for Northwestern. The speedy forward got 5 field goals, his third and fourth ones, tying the score with 35 seconds of the regulation game left. With Northwestern ahead 36-32, Shapiro scored from far out. A perfect set shot. Northwestern took the ball out of bounds, but Shapiro outguessed the passer, batted the ball in the air, and then dribbled under the Illinois goal unmolested for the tying points. Henry Sachs failed to make a penalty throw on Don Clausen's foul at the start of the overtime. Clausen broke the deadlock with a free throw on Bill Hocking's foul. Shapiro then popped in a long-distance throw. The lead changed when George Benson matched Shapiro's shot. Sachs sent Illinois ahead with another midcourt goal, only to have Clausen tie the count at 40-all when Art Matheson fouled. Matheson had been completely bottled up under his backboard, and he had made only 4 penalty shots in 6 attempts. But in the next Illini attack, he was the end man in 3 lightning passes, and his field goal clinched the game for Illinois. Illinois had superior team speed, but the Wildcats matched it occasionally and scored more frequently as a result of speed in the first half. In this period, the score was tied 4 times, and Northwestern overcame a 13-8 Illinois advantage to quit the floor at the intermission, leading 21-18. Minnesota defeated Chicago's Maroons 35-24 before 3,000 in the Midway Fieldhouse last night to bring its Big Ten standings to 2 victories against 1 defeat and leaving the Maroons without a conference conquest. Despite the fact that Minnesota lost both its regular centers, Bill Lind and Roger Carlson, on fouls, the Gophers hammered the Maroon defense until the weekend, outscoring the Maroons after the first 5 minutes. Captain Joe Stampf of Chicago led the scorers with 16 points against a Minnesota defense that apparently was geared specifically to stop him. Don Carlson of Minnesota was second with 11 points. Chicago tied the game at 3-3 2 minutes after it had started, but Minnesota then won ahead and increased its lead throughout the remainder of the game. The score at the half was Minnesota 20, Chicago 11. Ann Arbor, Michigan, January 18th. Wisconsin's Rangey basketball team scored its 3rd Western Conference victory tonight. At the same time, plunged Michigan deeper into the cellar by trimming the Wolverines 40-30 before 2,500. It was the 4th straight loss for Michigan in the Big Ten. The Wolverines ran until they were weary in an attempt to outspeed the sharpshooting Badgers, but the visitors' height advantage was an insurmountable handicap. The Wolverines failed to get a single jump ball all evening and lost most of the rebounds to Captain Gene Englund and his fellow 6-footers. England set the pace during a wild first half with 8 points, and the Badgers led 21-17 at the halftime. During the second period, he was held in check and finally forced out with 4 personals after bringing his total to 11 points for the night. The big surprise of the night was the performance of Michigan sophomore Mel Coleman of Chicago, who replaced Jim Mandler at center early in the game and tallied 11 points. Coleman brought Michigan to within 1 point of Wisconsin early in the second half and made 7 of 13 Wolverine points during this final period. Lansing, Michigan, January 18th. Max Hindman, veteran Michigan State center, tonight scored 20 points to lead the Spartans to a 41-35 victory over West Virginia's basketball team. The victory was the 6th in a row for the Spartans. Hindman sank 7 field goals and 6 free throws. Michigan State led at the half, 21-12. Columbus, Ohio, January 18th. Ohio State handed to Queens University of Pittsburgh its first defeat of the season in 9 starts tonight, 44-33 before 5,416. After the lead had changed hands 3 times in the first 5 minutes, Ohio State won out in front and never was headed, although the Dukes were in striking distance throughout. The Buckeyes were ahead at the half, 19-15. In the second half, they gradually wore down their opponents in a rough-and-tumble exhibition, which reached its climax when a double foul was called on Jack McLean, Ohio center, and Kasperick, the Duquesne center. Individual scoring honors were divided between 2 Buckeyes, McLean and Gil Michelson, who counted 13 points each. It was the 6th consecutive victory for Ohio State, including 3 Big Ten games. The league-leading Oshkosh All-Stars, who defeated the Chicago Bruins 43-36, and Oshkosh recently will make their first appearance of the season in Chicago when they oppose the Bruins in the 132nd Regiment Armory, Madison and Rockwell Streets Wednesday night. For the Bruins, the game means a chance for revenge. When the teams met in Oshkosh, the Bruins had a 30-24 lead going into the last half, but saw it disappear when unable to score consistently in the third and fourth periods. The Bruins blamed the new type of fan-shaped backboard for their inaccurate aiming and believe the home floor advantage will help Wednesday night. Notre Dame, Indiana, January 18th. 5 Notre Dame football players, all of whom have finished their playing careers, have been notified to report next June for 1 year of Army training under the Selective Service Act. Included are Bob Osterman, center, John Gubanich, right guard, 1940 regulars, both seniors, Henry Schrendker, reserve senior right guard, and Bob Sullivan and Jim McGoldrick, assistant freshman coaches who have been studying law. McGoldrick captained the 1938 team. Sullivan finished his playing career in 1939. Kansas City, Missouri, January 18th. Bill Tobin, president of the Chicago Blackhawks Hockey Club, said tonight he expected to complete a deal tomorrow that would place the Kansas City Americans of the American Hockey Association under Blackhawk management. Tobin will attend a joint meeting of the National League and American Association at Chicago tomorrow. Toronto, Ontario, January 18th. Dick Clapper's 200th National Hockey League goal gave the Boston Bruins a 1-0 victory over the Toronto Maple Leafs tonight in a game which attracted 14,745. A neat pass from Bill Cowley set up the scoring play for Clapper at 12:34 of the third period. Cowley broke at his own blue line, flanked by veteran defenseman on his right. He went in on the Toronto rear guard, and when he went right in on the Toronto rear guard, and when he made the pass, Clapper had only to steer it into the net. The Bruins left immediately after the game for Chicago, where tomorrow night they will meet the Blackhawks in the stadium. Boston will defend a record which leaves them unbeaten in their last 10 games. In prior games in Chicago, the Bruins and Hawks have broken even. The Blackhawks won one and gained a tie in their visits to Boston. Montreal, Quebec, January 18th. The sixth-place Montreal Canadiens, flashing a 2-goal scoring attack in the first period, outlasted Detroit's injury-riddled Red Wings for a 2-1 victory tonight in a National Hockey League game attended by 8,740. The Wings played the match with only 12 men, and one of them, Sid Abel, was forced out of action in the second period when he aggravated an old shoulder injury. Manager Jack Adams said prior to the match that he hopes to have Kenneth Kilrea and Coney Brown join the team from the American League for Detroit's game with the New York Rangers tomorrow. Mrs. Grace Comiskey, widow of J. Lewis Comiskey, and daughters Dorothy and Gracie Lou will become trustees of the White Sox and thus actual operators of the club if an action filed yesterday is answered favorably by Circuit Court Judge Philip Finnegan. The First National Bank trustee and administrator of the estate under Comiskey's will petitioned through the law firm of Mayer and Mayer, Austrian and Pratt, for leave to withdraw. Attorneys Thomas J. Sheehan and Roy J. Egan, answering the friendly complaint, asked that the widow and daughters be appointed. Judge Finnegan set no date for a hearing, but appointed James A. Harrington, guardian for Charles Comiskey II, 15 years old, pending action by the court on the bank's request. Jimmy Wilson, on a visit to Chicago several days ago, made it clear the Cubs will have plenty of baseball playing to do once they arrive at their training base on Catalina Island. Jimmy had cut 5 days off the training schedule as laid out by Gabby Hartnett when Gabby thought he was going to direct the Cubs again in 1941, and this curtailment led to the suspicion that Jimmy might be afraid of overexerting his new proteges. Said Jimmy, "The Cubs are going to get plenty of exercise before they begin their exhibition schedule and plenty more in their meetings with the Athletics, Pirates, and White Sox. There will be inter-club games on the island just as soon as the pitchers get the kinks out of their arms, and these games will be played seriously. There will be no danger of youngsters injuring themselves while showing off on the first 2 or 3 days of practice. I realize this danger, but I'll insist on plenty of hard work along lines designed to have the boys ready to do their best on the opening day of the season and thereafter. The way to prepare baseball muscles is to play baseball, and baseball drills should be interesting to players who want to be major league regulars. There will be no fancy sidelines like kicking a soccer ball, etc. If an athlete is bored with what he thinks is too much baseball practice, it's just as well that I find it out before the National League season starts. I have never been in California, but I have been making inquiries about weather conditions, and I know that I can adjust my plans to the one drill a day arrangement along the custom at Avalon. The dew on the island has the grass wet until 10 o'clock each morning, and a wind generally comes up at 2 o'clock, and for these reasons, Cub training camp practices usually are confined to 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Schedule, though the sun shines warm and bright for a much longer period. I plan no changes in the routine of the players after the daily practice. Those who want to play golf after the practice may do so. And I'll discourage those goat shooting parties, though I'll ask the fellows to be sure not to shoot each other. The Cubs will have a good chance to perform in fine weather in their first 23 games after leaving their Catalina base for the mainland. Their first 3 games will be with the A's in Los Angeles, and if they do encounter foggy weather there, they are likely to get a better setting on their 4th day when they go to Anaheim in the so-called Orange Empire, which is the A's training base. After Anaheim, they have a solid week in Los Angeles, then go to Ontario, another fine weather spot. Then, after 4 more days in Los Angeles, they will go to San Bernardino. The Cubs never have had a bad day on visiting the Pirates there. The Cubs can't miss having good weather the first 4 days they are on the road after leaving California, for they will play in Yuma, Tucson, and Phoenix, where April weather is always perfect. After that, they have a gambling chance to find some good going in their remaining 4 towns en route to Chicago. Exhibition schedule and everything else considered, Wilson has more than the Cub average chance to bring a well-conditioned squad into Chicago. And wouldn't it be dandy, not to say miraculous, if he arrived next mid-April with Dizzy Dean and Clay Bryant quarreling for the honor of pitching the season opener? Cleveland, Ohio, January 18th. Bob Feller, a veteran at 22 years of age, is on his way to becoming the highest paid pitcher in baseball history with a 1941 salary approximating $30,000. Final contract negotiations and possible conscription for the Army are the only hurdles standing between Feller and the record. Feller's high draft number virtually rules out the possibility he will join the Army this year. He is 2,857th in a Cleveland district with 3,814 registrants. If 10% of the registrants are accepted for service and the district is called upon to supply 30 draftees a month, Bob will not be summoned for at least 10 months, and 10% is a conservative figure. A larger proportion of those ahead of Feller likely will be accepted. Feller certainly will not be called this year unless dire circumstances develop, a draft official said today. Feller will fly here Tuesday from Van Meter, Iowa to negotiate his 1941 contract. He will be armed with his impressive 1940 record of 27 victories. The Indians do not announce players' salaries, but well-informed sources place Feller's 1940 pay at $26,000 or more. Even if Feller doesn't enter the Army this year, he will be doing something for Uncle Sam. The income tax on $30,000 for an unmarried person without dependents is $6,063.23. Cleveland, Ohio, January 18th. George Birdie Tebbetts, Detroit Tigers catcher, was ordered today to answer an assault and battery charge before Judge Frank J. Lausch next Saturday. The charge was brought by Carmen Guerra, convicted of disorderly conduct after a basket of tomatoes was dropped on Tebbetts' head during a Detroit-Cleveland baseball game last September 27th. New York, January 18th. The number of players signed by the New York Giants reached 9 today when Harry Gumbert, right-handed pitcher, sent in his contract. Gumbert won 12 and lost 14 for the Giants last year. St. Louis, Missouri, January 18th. Don Gutteridge, Cardinal reserve infielder, was released outright today to the Sacramento club of the Pacific Coast League, a Cardinal farm. There he will play under Pepper Martin. The Chicago Cardinals yesterday announced the signing of 6 new players, the first of a core of rookies. Coach Jimmy Konzelman hopes to take into camp next August when he resumes the search for a pennant contender in the National Football League. Only one of the 6 was among the 20 drafted by Konzelman last month. He is Gates Kimball, a guard from the University of North Carolina. The others are Len Darnell, a 190-pound end from Duke, Boyce Nall, 200-pound guard from North Texas State Teachers College, J.B. Higgins Jr., a 220-pound tackle from Trinity University, Mike Kladovich, a tailback from St. Mary's, who also played some football at Fresno State College, and Fred Schnook, a 235-pound center from Texas Christian. Shook took over TCU when Kai Aldrich joined the Cardinals. He played with the Long Island Indians in the American Association last year after being barred at TCU for a flight into matrimony. Konzelman has gone to California to contact other draftees and players he would like to take a look at in August. Meanwhile, assistant coach Phil Handler, who has been beating the bushes in the Southwest, is back in Chicago seeking sedatives after an encounter with the eccentric Mr. Jay Kimbrough of Texas Aggies Cardinals draftee, whom he sought to sign. Kimbrough's schemes of high finance and ranchless ranching left the hardy Handler limp and quivering. Owner Charles Bidwell took a hand in player affairs over the weekend by turning down an offer from the Brooklyn Dodgers for Marshall Goldberg. The Dodgers are said to have offered cash for the former Pitt star, but Bidwell sent back word to coach Jock Sutherland that Goldberg was not for sale or trade. Clarence Ace Parker, Brooklyn quarterback, yesterday was voted National Football League's most valuable player of the 1940 season. The selection was made by a committee of 40 members of the Professional Football Writers Association of America, qualifying the 175-pound back to receive the Joe F. Carr Memorial Award. Parker, ace to millions of football fans, is the same young man who declared early last fall that his pro football career was ended. This statement came shortly after he had broken an ankle while playing shortstop for the Syracuse club of the International League. But later, the brilliant triple threader changed his mind, donned a bothersome protective brace, and began what turned out to be the greatest season he ever had on any gridiron, college or professional. He was the spark of a fine Dodger 11 turned out by Jock Sutherland in his first year as coach. Parker polled 18 of a possible 40 first-place votes and 7 second-place votes, giving him a total of 118 points, more than double the number of runner-up Sandy Baugh of Washington. Baugh, the Redskins' passing star, finished closest to Parker with 55 points. First-place ballots counted 5 points, second 4 points, etc. Sid Luckman, field general for the Chicago Bears, world's champions, was third with 38 points, and Green Bay's Don Hutson rated fourth with 22. And that is sports, and that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune for Sunday, January 19th, 1941. Have a swell day.